Okay, perfect.
Mhm.
All right, then let's get started. All right, so welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today in this webinar. Today we're going to really be digging into one of the most common problems, but least visible ones that we see in manufacturing operations. So just to get started, a brief introduction. I'm Brandon, and I'm a founder's associate working here at Workerbase. And
I'm Robin. I'm solution consultant at Workerbase.
all right, awesome. And so today we'll be essentially covering when production stops, who responds, right? And how quickly, and we'll essentially be walking you through this challenge that we're seeing across manufacturers today. So before we dive into it, I'll just like to give a brief outline and a bit of housekeeping. We'll start off with a brief introduction of who we are and kind of the status quo that we're seeing. And then later on, Robin will take over and lead you guys through a use case overview, as well as an in-depth dive of how lean manufacturers are essentially solving this challenge today. And then we'll be closing off with some results that we're seeing amongst our customers, as well as a short Q&A to answer any outstanding questions you guys have. If you do have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. You should see a tab on the right side, and we'll be answering them all at the end. All right, so let's get into it. So for those who have joined us before or are familiar with us, this is a bit of a repeat, but for those who are new today, I'd like to just give a short introduction. We're a Munich-based SaaS platform for manufacturing execution, and really the story behind Workerbase is that our founders really started off at Siemens, and when they were visiting a factory, they saw that there's a lot of R&D work going on, and essentially they were going through some of the production floor, and they noticed that, you know, on a machine operator station, it was really interesting that they saw there's just a sticky note on one side with codes and instructions, and that was essentially his work order for the day. And essentially on the other side, there was SAP with millions of rows and columns. And between these $1 billion system and really just a paper note, there was nothing, right? And essentially this gap between what systems know and what workers are actually doing on the floor, we believe that this is where many of the modern day challenges in manufacturing are really stemming from. So quality issues, downtime, rework, safety incidents. And it's really not because the people don't care, but it's mainly a systems issue because nobody has built the bridge. And that's why Workerbase exists. And we're currently live with 60 plants, with over 6,000 workers using our platform every day, live at some of the leading manufacturers across the world. And so I'm mentioning this because in the next 30 minutes, we'll be covering not only theory, right, but also what we're seeing live in real factories, real operators, and real production lines. So let's get into it. So what is the invisible problem? Picture this, right? So this is pretty stereotypical in many of your factories, maybe. A frontline worker at one of their stations, they might need some help in some sort of way, right? It can be a missing part. Maybe it's a quality issue that they're not used to handling, something missing from their training, and what happens next? So in some plants, it can be an and-on light. In other plants, the worker might look for a supervisor. There might be some sort of digital system in place, but more often than not, the resulting action is usually a string of manual communication, passing of information until it's resolved, right? So he might go find a supervisor, they might find somebody who knows how to resolve the issue. And, this might only take, 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes at most, right? But if you think about it, this is happening across your lines every day, across shifts. And so this isn't just a singular issue, but a structural challenge, right? And what makes it really hard to fix is you might have systems in place for planning, and you might have your SCADA systems for data, right? And your MES that's logging production events. But essentially, like, these minor escalations that occur aren't really being stored. And when they are being stored, it's usually after the fact, right? And you really don't really hear about this often, I think, from a manager point of view until it's really bad, or if somebody mentions it in passing, right? And the rest of this kind of just disappears. And so support calls are just kind of one example of the systematic issue that we see, right? So it might manifest in other forms, such as shift handovers going wrong, machine downtime with similar root causes returning, changeovers going bad, and audits failing. And truly fixing this problem is hard because, like I said, it's not really a people problem, it's a systems problem. But this also essentially raises an interesting paradox, right? Since obviously across the market today, manufacturers are investing more and more, or more than ever, obviously, into smart manufacturing and Industry 4.0 technologies, sensors, automation, data infrastructure, and factories by and large are getting smarter. But there is really just a gap that we see that a lot of this investment hasn't been touching it until recently. So according to research, nearly 8 out of 10 of factory workers are still relying on some form of paper-based documentation to track and communicate their work. And we're seeing that this is not just on the shop floor, but also strategically. Only 1 in 4 manufacturers have actually adopted some sort of technology to help essentially frontline workers in their day-to-day work. And it's really interesting because they're essentially digitizing everything around frontline operators and workers on their factory floor, but not really addressing workers themselves. And so what makes this striking too is, we can see that 35% of senior managers are saying that this is a problem, right? Adapting workers to the factory of the future is a concern. And this is kind of the problem that we're trying to solve, this last mile gap. So the systems are there, the data is there, but the person who's on the floor, who's responding to events, managing deviations, and doing their tasks on a day-to-day basis, they're still by and large unsupported in certain ways. And so we call this kind of the execution gap, right? You have your existing standard factory IT stack that's handling a lot of the high level things, but between these systems and kind of the person on the shop floor, there's no holistic solution connecting them into day-to-day execution. And this gap is really costing performance, right? And we're seeing even at world-class manufacturers producing the highest quality products that they're facing these exact problems. And so the real question then is like, how much performance can you actually bring from bridging this gap, right? And typically what we see in practice is you see significant improvements in OEE, first pass yield, worker productivity, and improvements to the bottom line. So at ThyssenKrupp, we saw a 12 to 15% increase in worker productivity. And at Porsche, they increased their first pass yield and significantly cut down on their line stops. And this is just real life data coming from our experiences with our customers. And also, there's always the question also of adoption, right? And introducing new technologies usually is met with some resistance, and there's change management to be talked about. But what we see is usually workers actually don't like having to deal with these challenges as well, right? They don't want to be disrupted, and they want to be able to feel like they can solve their own issues on the shop floor. And interestingly enough, at many of our implementations, we see that workers actually actively ask for solutions like this to be expanded because it makes their day-to-day lives easier. So before I kind of hand it off to Robin, who will go a bit more into like the technical details and the know-how, I'll just give you guys a brief overview of what is Workerbase, right? So at its core, it's really a platform that connects to existing manufacturing systems, right? So like I mentioned earlier, your ERP, if you have an MES in place, your PLM, SCADA systems, if you have quality management or warehouse management systems, they can all come into the fold, and it essentially plugs in on top. And inside the platform, it's everything you need to essentially help run and digitize day-to-day factory execution. So think your task assignment, your escalations, digital work instructions, shop floor management and dashboards. And it all lives inside of a backend that lets your teams configure workflows and essentially digital processes for what goes on in your factory on a day-to-day basis. And so to put it simply, it's based on a universal interface and a backend where your teams can help configure and streamline activities that happen on your shop floor. So now I'll let Robin take it away and take you guys into what it looks like in practice.
Thanks, Brandon. So let's now look at this in practice. We have covered why the execution gap exists at a structural level. Now let's get very specific, because for many of you, a use case that sits at the center of this problem, the one that you feel every day, is support calls. A frontline worker needs help at a station. Who responds, how fast, and how do you know it happened? I want to show you what it actually looks like when it is working properly. And for that, I want to start with a breakdown of how a conventional versus a worker-based support call affects your production. On the left, you see the reality in most plants today, a fully manual analog process. A frontline worker runs into an issue and needs support. They wait, raise their hand, or leave the station to find someone. And at this point, we've seen everything, right? From shouting across the shop floor to looking up the shift leads, WhatsApp number in a paper folder, trying to call them, not reaching them, searching them over the whole shop floor. We've seen it all. And what happens next is that it depends entirely on who is nearby, who responds, and how well the issue is explained. There's no structure, no consistency, and no system capturing what actually happened. Now on the right, the exact same situation with Workerbase in place. The operator submits a request directly from their device, and within seconds, the right person is notified based on role, skill, and availability. And if there's no response, the system can automatically escalate to the next level. And importantly, every step is tracked. Who was notified, when they arrived, and what caused the downtime. So the real tip here is not the device or the app, it's accountability. For the first time, there's a system that makes response times visible, tracks resolution, and creates a foundation for continuous improvement measures. And that has a direct impact. For example, one of our customers, Gazelle, reduced downtime by up to 35% simply by improving response times and using the data to continuously optimize their process. So before we look at this in practice, let's walk through what an end-to-end process in Workerbase actually looks like. So if a shop floor event occurs, in this case, an issue during the assembly process, then, and for this specific process in the demo you will see in a minute, this is very similar to the actual use case at Gazelle, where we have integrated the physical belt. So if the operator requests help, we are not only triggering the digital workflow, but also physically stopping the line. And this you can view as an add-on to the use case. We also didn't have it in the beginning there. So use cases can also be installed without that physical line stop and will be a tremendous benefit as well. And with the help request trigger, the platform immediately identifies who should respond based on role, shift, skills, current workload, or location. And that person receives a notification with full context. So not just an alert, but something they can act on immediately because they know the issue, the context, the product, the order, whatever we want to integrate here. And if there's no response within a defined time window, the request can escalate to the next level, for example, from team lead to shift lead. And if needed, we can escalate as much as needed in the end. And at the same time, on the shop floor, the process continues. The request is accepted, the issue is resolved, and the line can be restarted. And importantly, every single step is tracked. Who was notified, when the task was accepted, how long resolution took. You will also notice that the categorization of the downtime and the reason selection is not done by the operator triggering the help request. So this is a deliberate design choice for this specific use case. We wanted to keep the operator focused on running the line and minimize any additional documentation effort. But of course, this can also be configured in a different way. So instead, this documentation step is handled by the team lead afterwards, once the line is running again and at a point where there's time to actually do the documentation. So we don't take any of the actual production time for documentation. And what this generally really shows is a fundamental shift. You move from a process that lives in people's heads to one that's structured, repeatable, and fully transparent across every shift. Now, let's take a look at it in practice. And for that, let me quickly reshare. So here you should now be able to see two Workerbase clients. So this is the view for the operators, what they can see on their device. On the right side, you can just see a browser window. So that's how it would look like on the computer or on a tablet. And on the left side, there's another client. That's the view on a smartphone. So in this case, it's just the view on my iPhone, but generally we are device agnostic here. You can see I'm now in the task overview for both users, and for the right user, which is in our case now for this demo, the demo or the assembly user, we can start an app by going to the apps page and start the assembly. Now, this here might be a typical assembly step with step-by-step instructions, just to also show to you where we can have a description of what needs to be done, a material list, and all that stuff. And we have the undone stop attached to the assembly instructions here. Of course, you can also start without all that here, and just by using the undone stop, which is also a very typical starting point. So let's say I, as an operator, have a problem and I am triggering the undone stop here. So now, in this case, the line would be stopped, physically stopped, and you can see immediately on the left side, I'm getting a notification that there was an undone stop, and I know exactly the context right away. I know the location, I know the product that's currently being produced, I know the name of the operator that requested help. So when seeing the notification and when going to the line, I can immediately see what this is about. But first of all, I have to accept this. And of course, the task is sent with a role-based access control, essentially. So everyone who can help here will receive the task. Now, I have taken over responsibility for the task. And you might have seen on the right, there was a small pop-up notification that the team lead has accepted the task. So the operator here on the right also knows the status of the task and that someone is taking over here. Switching back to the left to my demo application, I can see all relevant information. I can just confirm it. And yeah, then going to the line, helping the operator to solve the issue. And when the issue is solved, the operator can then click restart to restart the line, or when there's no line integration, just say, yeah, issue is resolved. And then we also have the timestamps of when the issue started and when it ended. So here, the line is started again. I'm done with everything, and I can continue my assembly process, focusing on production time. And switching back to the left, to the team lead, here we are now getting the reason selection task. So this is now the documentation of the downtime. And you can also see this now as a lower priority. Of course, the undone stop itself has a high priority. I should immediately go there and help. This one I can accept. I can do it right away, or I can also close it, keep it in my tasks, and do it later if I wish. Now let's go back into the task. And here also a very typical example, we can see at many customers, a two-level reason selection. So we say maybe this reason or this downtime was caused by the operator, and the operator needs a little bit more training because there was just an assembly problem here. So I'm selecting this one, continue, and that's it. The app itself, very simple for the operator, but the data being generated with it is of course extremely valuable. So this is the demo application for one variant of an undone stop. Of course, generally we can configure it whatever your process might look like. This is just one example. Now let's jump back into the slides. Okay, so we have seen the demo of this process, and now I would like to elaborate on the effect this platform and the way Workerbase is designed for direct shop floor impact, how it has, or it becomes very visible in how teams work with it. And we see that especially in focused formats like hackathons, where new use cases can be developed extremely quickly. And with customers like Porsche or ThyssenKrupp, we do these hackathons and we bring together cross-functional teams, IT, process experts, and even operators from the shop floor. And then within just 1 or 2 days, these teams build real production-ready use cases directly on the platform. So what naturally happens in that setup is exactly what drives the impact. You get very fast solution development because there are no long handovers. The solutions reflect reality because the people closest to the process are directly involved. And you create strong alignment across teams by working on one shared solution. And what's especially powerful is the level of ownership here. So operators and process experts are not just users, they actively shape what gets built. And the outcome is not a prototype sitting somewhere. These are use cases that can go live on shop floor and can be easily scaled to additional sites. And that's in total why we consistently see high adoption and speed. So it's just a much more collaborative way of building solutions and one that immediately improves day-to-day operations. Now, let's look at what this translates to in practice. So let me share what customers have actually seen after deploying Workerbase, focused now specifically on the support call and unbound use case. And for that, here is a video from our customer Porsche that perfectly shows the use case in their production. They call it digitale Meldekette. So they view it as a whole process, not just one single app, but it's a whole process chain of of structurally responding to issues.
Workerbase bietet uns die Möglichkeit, Prozesse einfach zu digitalisieren und immer weiter zu verbessern. Dadurch haben wir die Linienverfügbarkeit erhöht und die Produktionskosten gesenkt.
Ein Beispiel dafür ist unsere digitale Meldekette in Workerbase. Schon eine kurze Unterbrechung kann einen großen Einfluss auf unsere täglichen Produktionsziele haben. Unser Ziel war es, den alten manuellen Meldeprozess vollständig zu digitalisieren und ungeplante Linienstopps komplett zu vermeiden. Früher gab es keine automatische Koordination, keine Dokumentation und die Support-Teams hatten oft bei ihrer Ankunft nicht die richtigen Informationen. Das führte zu Reaktionsverzögerungen und eine mangelnde Transparenz entlang der Linie. Mit den digitalen Support-Calls kann ein Mitarbeiter nun direkt von seinem Arbeitsplatz aus Hilfe anfordern, zum Beispiel um seinen Teamleiter zu rufen oder Material anzufordern. Die Anfrage wird sofort an die richtige Person weitergeleitet, die alle notwendigen Informationen auf ihrem Smartphone erhält.
Die Meldekette ist für uns auf dem Shopfloor echt zu einem Gamechanger geworden. Wenn jetzt was passiert, kann ich mit einem Klick Unterstützung anfordern und die Hilfe kommt wirklich sofort. So können wir reagieren, bevor die Linie steht und so Stillstände erheblich reduzieren. Das spart uns Zeit, uns aufs Wesentliche, nämlich das Autobauen, zu konzentrieren. Das System hilft uns so, täglich besser zusammenzuarbeiten und macht unsere Arbeit wirklich einfacher. Wir verlieren keine Zeit mehr mit der Koordination, wir kümmern uns um die Problemlösung und halten so die Produktion am Laufen.
Jeder Support-Call erzeugt wertvolle Daten. Zum ersten Mal können wir Ursachen direkt nachvollziehen und Verbesserungen in Echtzeit ableiten. Diese Erkenntnisse helfen uns dabei, unsere Prozesse kontinuierlich zu optimieren, um Linienstopps zu vermeiden. So wird unsere Produktion noch robuster und effizienter.
Die Lösung ist schnell, flexibel und fügt sich ideal in unsere Porsche IT-Strategie ein.
So you can see, what Jens Brücker said perfectly fits into their IT strategy. As you've seen, these big screens on the production floor, those are actually their MES screens. And here we have integrated within that. So Workerbase runs within their MES environment. And now let me highlight two concrete results from customers I am actually personally working with. Starting with Porsche, they reported 7-figure annual savings confirmed at CFO level. And this doesn't come from a single use case, of course, but from systematically closing execution gaps on the shop floor. Things like real-time access to vehicle information or coordinating internal logistics more efficiently. And the example you saw in the video is just one of many use cases they've implemented. And at Porsche production volumes, even small improvements, of course, scale very quickly into significant financial impact. And now looking at Gazelle, they achieved up to 35% reduction in unplanned downtime. Of course, different company, different industry, but the same underlying challenge. Unplanned downtime is one of the biggest cost drivers in manufacturing. Not because of one major failure, but because of the accumulation of many small disruptions that are never properly tracked or resolved. And the demo I showed earlier is actually very close to the functionality used at Gazelle. But it doesn't stop there. Of course, over time, they have built a broad set of use cases across assembly, quality, and support processes. So, Brandon.
All right, thank you,
over to
Robin.
you.
Give me one moment. Can you see the screen? All right, it's sharing. All right, awesome. So thanks for sharing that, obviously, Robin. And this kind of brings us towards the end of the webinar today. So just before we go to the Q&A, we'll just do a quick recap, that we've essentially covered a solution that we've essentially seen to address some of the most common problems we're seeing at manufacturers today, essentially, which is dealing with escalation on floor level problems. And we're saying that this essentially closes what we call the execution gap. Now, I guess we'll quickly go into some frequently asked questions and any questions that we saw appear in the chat. And I guess we can just start off with the first one here. So in general, regarding this configuration, I'd like to ask you, Robin, so how are these rules essentially configured? Is there a case where which workers get notified for what type of issue?
Yeah, so generally in the low-code app editor, that's really easy to do. So if you just want to change or add any roles here, you can do that by a few clicks and by just reconfiguring the rules.
And so that's kind of also the case, I'm guessing, for how the system knows which is the right colleague to notify.
Yeah, exactly. So typically we cluster that below roles and sometimes even skills. So we can very precisely target the right colleague then.
Okay, awesome. And then I guess I'm not so familiar, or I don't work so much with the customers, I guess, on this topic, but regarding implementation, I guess, and deployment, could you, how long does it usually take to deploy at customers?
Yeah, here, of course, you have to say it depends, but it can be very quick. So for example, the demo here, that's maybe a 1-hour exercise. If you then want to connect your systems, maybe connect a physical belt, of course, that takes a little bit more time, usually also the typical IT integration task that you have to do, but generally it's really, really fast and simple.
Okay, awesome. And so then that kind of leads into the next question, where it's, I guess, in terms of scaling and using this, because most manufacturers have multi-site operations and standardization across them. How does that kind of sit in there?
Yeah, here maybe also the Gazelle example is interesting, because also in here we started with one plant and then expanded that to another plant in Lithuania and a third plant in Germany. So we just built the use case once, scalable, and then just kind of expanded it to the additional plants and just did the translation stuff that can also be automated, so you can very easily scale to additional languages and plants.
All right. So I think that's about all the time we have for today. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get to the last question, but if you have anything else regarding what you've seen today, feel free to reach out to us. And the recording and the slides should also be shared with you after this meeting. And so I'd like to just wrap it here and thank you for attending and hope to see you at the next webinar. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.